Harrison Price for Wednesday, January 29th, 2025, coming to you from the Nation Network studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the historic Wall Center, downtown Vancouver. And this show, a presentation of Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code NATION when opening that account. Matt Sakaris alongside Blake Price, four-time Juno Award winner Mike Rogerson, hitting switches, conducting things. We got a big show coming up. First, are you ready for snow, Blake Price?
I am. I'll believe it when I see it, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You have doubts.
We'll see. Forecast is kind of crazy. Not so much even in the snow. It's just a long stretch of cold weather.
Yeah.
It's
if
been
you
cold.
have told me we had this amount of cold weather in Vancouver with not a single day of precipitation, like of my 18 years living here, this is by far the driest, coldest January I can remember.
Yeah, it's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
The big question, of course, we got winter tires on that Outlander? Huh?
I do
From
not.
Surrey Mitsubishi?
I do not. So it will be in the driveway.
Oh, good to hear. Speaking of Surrey Mitsubishi poll question today, do you believe Canucks ownership will allow both JT Miller and Elias Pettersson to be traded? This coming off the heels of Jim Rutherford yesterday with the Globe and Mail, where he mused about trading one or both players. Blake, you get first crack at this.
I don't think so. I think it's going to be a big piece for the owner to swallow anyhow. And I don't know that he wraps his head around. I think he's going to try and say, guys, there's got to be another way besides both of them going out the door. So, I mean, there's an expiration date. There's a statute of limitations on this claim. Like 4 years from now, if the second player gets traded, does that count? No, I don't think it counts. I think it's implied that we mean in the somewhat imminent future, and I don't think that's going to happen.
I think a big name would have to come back in one of these trades. We know Francesco likes marquee value, big name players, names that excite the market. I agree with you. I think trading one of these guys might be distressing enough for the owner, but both of these guys in any kind of team recast, I think, I think that is a pretty big bridge to cross for Francesco because, of course, it could have business ramifications on top of the Quinn Hughes ramifications as well, right? If you're trading both these guys, you were recasting the roster and you are on the clock to deliver a team that Quinn Hughes feels is worthy of re-signing with because he feels that you can contend a couple of years down the road. So we know Francesco quashed at least the Ryan Kesler trade, the first Ryan Kesler trade at the deadline prior to the summer where he was ultimately traded. So I would be surprised unless there's some significant names coming back that you can put on the side of the building and use with season ticket subscribers if he would greenlight both of these guys.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't see a dollar-for-dollar trade happening or point-for-point trade, if you will, for one of these two guys. So I agree that if you got an unabashed superstar back for Elias Pettersson, could I then see it? Yeah, but I right now I can't see that. I don't think you're going to get a trade where fans push away from the table and say, yeah, that works for me. That's a great deal. Right now, there's just not enough momentum for either of these two players for that to be the case. I think it can change if one of these two guys goes on a heater, gets back above a point per game. I think that could change. But we're talking about one heck of a fortnight ahead or a month ahead for one of these two players.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you do something like Hedl a first and a prospect for JT Miller, then there better be some significant players and name value coming back from, say, a Buffalo if you're moving Pettersson thereafter.
But the thing is, I don't think Buffalo wants to make that deal for their peripheral players. Like, they're not going to give you Tage Thompson. They want to see Thompson and Pettersson together, I think, like on the same line.
Well, especially if they got Thompson playing on the wing, right? Like, if they've given up on the idea that Tage Thompson is going to play down the middle. Our friends at Surrey Mitsubishi have a special program exclusively for Sekeres Price audience members. If you've been turned down for financing in other dealerships, Surrey Mitsubishi has dedicated a representative, Jessica, who's committed to get you approved through their in-house financing program. Bad credit, negative equity on your current car. Jessica's going to apply the special program for you. Do everything possible to make sure you are approved. Email Jessica at surreymitsubishi.com. Make sure you mention Sekeres Price to get in on the program. Some conditions apply. Surrey Mitsubishi, 13820, 104th Avenue. Let's get to our lineup and our top story, brought to you by Yellow Dog Brewing, Neighborhood Brewing, Foolish Winery. Where do they go from here? Miller and Pettersson firmly on the block, knowing their issues are to blame for a lack of team chemistry, or at least so says Jim Rutherford. We wondered whether either player would be available this morning in Nashville, where the Canucks are prepping to take on the Predators. As you know, not a lot of traveling media anymore with the Vancouver Canucks outside of rights holders and in-house media. Elias skipped the optional morning skate, but JT was present and accounted for. JT takes most of the optionals and did make himself available to Predators media in the dressing room afterwards. Try as they might, he didn't have a lot to say. Here's JT.
Reaction to Jim Rutherford's comments yesterday or this week on the situation with you and Petey?
I don't have one.
You don't have any comments?
No.
Is there still all good between you two guys?
I'm not commenting on this.
He did go on to say that he thinks his game is trending in the right direction, answered a couple of other questions, but on that topic remained tight-lipped.
And thanks to Alex Doherty there, that clip courtesy of his work. Now the question, will Elias speak on this post-game? Is going to wait till Sunday, Monday when the team is back home. I would suspect there's a Sunday practice. They're in Dallas on Friday, everybody. No game Saturday. And then they're back home practice. Pre-game on Sunday. They have the Detroit Red Wings, on Sunday. So Friday in Dallas. I suspect Saturday will be a day off, and then Sunday against the Detroit Red Wings.
It's a 5 o'clock game.
So you don't know about a morning skate. Is going to have to wait until post-game that day, or are we talking about the first practice day, whether that's Monday or Wednesday of next week? JT's position has moved a little bit. Of course, when he was asked about this just before Christmas, he called it a creation of the outer world. No comment is not a denial. We should remember that.
Well, I think there's no room for a denial anymore.
I mean, there was no room for a denial in late December, and yet both of them offered pretty indignant denials.
And that's the thing.
Which look tremendously foolish now.
When he's eventually available, is there a reporter in the not-too-distant future, and I remember being on the road, as you mentioned, when's the next time those two players get asked, why did you guys deny it?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So many are wondering, why did Rutherford say what he said? Why did he have to lay it so naked, so bare? Somebody put it to me, he pulled his pants down in front of every other GM. But the whole world is talking. I mean, I did our friends Nat and Drew, their morning show today on Move Radio, Adult Contemporary. I got calls from across the league in the country about, what's going on there?
Biggest story.
Yeah. I mean, the Rantanen trade was great and all, but people had digested, and here came Jimmy. Talking Jimmy.
The reaction from the out-of-towners, I think, is important because they're looking more objectively than anybody inside the market. And their unanimous reaction, I think, Matt, was, what the is going on in Vancouver?
Yes.
Like what? Well, no one can understand the approach. If there's method to the madness, great. But nobody sees it. Like people just see a team that has laid itself bare, open for business and open for criticism.
Well, Rutherford clarified a little bit in a follow-up interview with Ian McIntyre.
Same-day follow-up. Like, what? You know, digital news moves fast when you can do a second interview.
Yeah. Well, I think that was probably because there were some
ruffled
upset
feathers.
people with the rights holders. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it works now. Rights holders access. Except in Jim Rutherford's world where he goes, the Globe and Mail. Yep, that's going to be my spot. Here's what Rutherford told IMAC. Quote, what I said everybody knows. It doesn't put talk or the players in any different position. They've been dealing with it. This is nothing new to them. There's no reason for them to feel any different than they felt all along. What I have now said publicly, which pretty much everybody knew anyways, except no one would say it. Nothing has changed for the players because the players have dealt with this every day.
Except they get caught in a lie. And everybody knows that now. Right? So that changes for them. Now they're going to have to look the fan base and the media in the eye and say,
yep,
there is something.
More from Rutherford to IMAC because he gets asked, and rightfully so, has this affected your bargaining position? Rutherford, quote, not worried about that because if we trade one of these players, we will trade them when we decide to and when we get what we want. And if we don't, we won't trade one of them. Again, common sense. Period, end quote.
Your use of the word affected also reminds me, that's the other thing that Rutherford laid bare too. This is affecting the room. So we can't accept that company line anymore of, oh, no, yeah, there's that thing, but it's okay. They're professionals. They're good. No. There's already been an admission from on high. This is affecting the team.
Yep. Now, of course, Rutherford didn't offer any details and told Mason that, not getting into the details of why they don't get along. Of course, the suspicion is that JT rides Elias Pettersson quite hard, and that has picked up this season after coaches failed, after a poor playoffs for Elias, and, of course, the new contract that makes him one of the NHL's highest paid players. Noah Strang of the Daily Hive asked what I thought was a pretty good question on X yesterday. He brought back out a story or a blog from Elliot Friedman from earlier this year about the way the Vancouver Canucks were handling Elias Pettersson. And Friedman's point was they didn't want it to be up to Rutherford or Alvin or Tocchet to do it. They really believe in their leadership group. I think they said, you guys are the ones that are going to have to do it. Miller's obviously taking that very literally. Boy, those words a little further down the road land a little different. And I think Hughes is involved too, Elliott wrote. He said, I think the Canucks see this as it might be better for Pettersson if it comes from his teammates as opposed to the coach of the GM. I think what the Canucks have said to their leadership group is Elias needs to get to another level. You all see it. We want you guys to get him there. And I think they all see it. They understand it, and they're trying to push him there. I don't think Pettersson always likes it. I think they're hoping he will understand that it's to make them win. Well, if that was the case, it has failed spectacularly. As Strang writes, if the Canucks knew about the Miller-PD tension, that report baffles me. Why enlist Miller to give a struggling PD tough love if it's a delicate situation? How do you look at the personalities involved and decide that's a good idea?
And
good questions.
This will wind people all the way to the Bo Horvat decision. And, is Miller a better player? Yes. But if you foresaw that this would be a possibility, why did you push all your chips into the Miller corner?
And I'm glad you asked, because that was also being asked yesterday by Canucks fans. And we'd heard that going back to last year with the Miller extension, the PD extension, and even this year as more of this was filtering out. Chris Conte, a member of Canucks X, Canucks Twitter. So let me get this straight. Management knew there was a long-standing rift between PD and Miller, yet they traded Horvat and locked both of them into long-term deals. the situation isn't just on the players; it's equally a failure on management's part.
And
that second part is fine. I have no quarrel there. If you want to say management has failed here, yes, absolutely. But, and again, J.R. Rutherford addressed this with Ian McIntyre, and Blake, we all said it at the time as well. Quote, because these players are top players for us, and if you have signed players and it doesn't work out, you're in a better position to get a return for them. Yes, protect the asset. Protect the asset.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's as questionable a call now as the original trade of Horvat. I think that's the one that you can go back in time and say, yeah, but you could have done this differently. Because you're forced to re-sign Miller because you've already made the other move.
Yep. Could have re-signed Horvat and traded Miller. Maybe you get Miller more for Miller.
And I think you definitely get Miller at a better price. You get more back. And I think you get Horvat at a better price than what ultimately Lou Lamoriello gave him as well.
Because he got a pretty quick extension there, and the theory would have been that Bo would have given them a hometown discount as the captain of the club.
Right.
Hoping to be a lifetime Canuck, right?
Yeah.
And we know how Bo and Holly and the Horvats felt about this market.
So if you got Horvat at 7.5.
If not the building and atmosphere at Rogers Arena, I'll tell you that for free.
If you've got Horvat at 7.5 or 7.25 instead, you got the extra cap space, and you don't have the...
And that's all fair.
Yeah.
But let's remember this. JT Miller's a better player than Bo Horvat.
Yep.
Certainly was at the time. Certainly has been in the intervening 2 years.
Yep.
You know, maybe it's closer this year, but a 109-point team in the second round, Game 7 against the eventual Western Conference champion with Bo Horvat as opposed to JT Miller?
I mean, Bo Horvat was freaking good in the bubble
He was
playoffs.
Incredible in the bubble playoffs.
So I don't know in the playoffs itself if you're any worse. But in the regular
would you
season.
have been the top seed in the Pacific Division? Yeah.
But again, you're right, though. He's having a much better season than Miller is this season. So is that a better sample size to look at the first 4 years of these contracts?
He's having a much better season. JT, of course, a 10-game leave of absence and began the season with some sort of neck, arm, shoulder, we're not quite sure, ailment. He, of course, was not taking faceoffs there at one point. Patrick Johnston of the province, and we'll have PJ on Friday. Got Jeff tomorrow, PJ Friday. The situation is now thus. A Miller trade for sure, but a Pettersson trade is also possible. It's not one or the other. It's Miller or Miller and Pettersson. Do you concur?
That there's no avenue to Miller remaining.
Yes, because I don't think JT wants to be here anymore, and I think Elias does.
I think that JT Miller would remain here if Pettersson was traded. I think he likes it here a lot. I think his family has laid down a lot of roots here.
They have. They got a house in West Van.
A business here for her. I think the world changes, and I'm not.
Really?
I'm not cheering this on, but I just think it's.
But we all agree that JT would welcome a change of scenery now, right?
Right, knowing that Pettersson is here, yes, right now, yeah.
And I think we also would all agree that the Vancouver Canucks want to trade JT Miller.
Because of that, yes. I think in a vacuum, if you could eliminate the noise and ask Rick Tocchet, would you have JT Miller on your team going forward? He would say yes. I think if you asked the other GMs, if you're building a team and you got JT Miller, would you be okay with that? They would say yes. I think they just know that in this situation right now, the best course of action is probably to get rid of JT Miller.
Yep. So, what was Rutherford trying to achieve? Couple of theories here. Was he preparing fans for a trade that just isn't going to look great on the surface?
Maybe.
Is he giving himself an out, so to speak? Okay, well, here's the return on Miller. But, remember what I said a couple of days or a couple of weeks ago.
I mean, if either of those things were his goals, I don't know that they were greatly altered by him giving the interview. I think any disappointment that's by the fans is going to be there, whether he gave that interview or not.
Does he just like the attention? This is another example where Jim should have, quote, zipped it?
I mean, if of all the doors you just opened up here, which one do I think I would walk through? It's that one. And I don't mean it from a necessarily narcissistic accusation or anything like that. I just think...
Well, I think there's a little ego and narcissism involved.
Like every, big name.
And you have
sure, but I mean, I just think he's talking hockey like he always has.
And I think you have to understand, like, for years, Rutherford toiled in Hartford and then Carolina, which are like B or C markets in the NHL. I used to watch him work the draft and just how it would seemingly be Jim Rutherford in a circle holding court with everybody. Other GMs, national media guys, fans. Like, he loved being in that milieu because for so many years in Carolina, like, he's dealing with one beat reporter. Like, it didn't feel major league, I'm sure.
The management version of Trotz and Hitchcock coming through when they were with Nashville and Dallas,
exactly.
respectively.
Barry and Ken would sit there all
day.
Freaking day
Half
at
an hour.
Rogers.
Yeah.
Barry, there were some answers from Barry Trotz that would be 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
Hitch would be like, "Oh, is that it? You guys are done?" You can see he was upset, disappointed. He would sit there all day and talk hockey in his gray hockey.
Matt, I also think Jim Rutherford. Not only is Jim Rutherford, conditioned a little bit to open up when asked. Mm-hmm. I think he's had enough of this situation.
Yeah, I think there's some frustration as well. That was my next one. Is it just pure frustration?
And I think it is, but I don't think it's like I'm frustrated, so I'm going to give the interview. I think he was in the interview and it's just like at wit's end.
I think he is too smart a guy to have no calculating reason. I think there was absolutely something about the strategy and tactics in this that was calculated and makes sense to Jim Rutherford.
I hope you're right, Matt, because I think he is a pretty smart guy.
Yes.
And if it is calculated, hopefully it'll work in his regard, and the Canucks aren't fleeced in this deal.
Like I mentioned to you yesterday, though, Blake. So let's say you're Kevin Adams in Buffalo, and you've made an offer on Elias Pettersson that's not good enough because the Vancouver Canucks have not accepted it. And you hear Rutherford, and you read what he had to say. Does that not shoot a little urgency through you? Like, oh, man, if we want Elias Pettersson, we got to improve the offer because Jim sounds like he's at wit's end with this. And the second he moves one of these guys, that might be it. Either we lose out on Pettersson or he moves Miller and they're going to try and make it work with Pettersson. I wonder whether he was messaging having been left at the altar by the Rangers on Miller, having been left at the altar by Tulsa and Carolina on Pettersson. I wonder if it was designed to shoot a little fear of loss into some of the other teams that are involved on these players. Up your offer. Let's do business. We want resolution here. And I'll tell you as much because I'm going to tell the world as much in a national newspaper.
I don't think so because I don't think anybody is under any illusion that the Canucks are fending off decent offers. If they were fending off decent offers, but they were looking for that one sweetheart deal, then I understand you wrote it. I think everybody's assumption right now is that they're not getting many good offers at all. And I think that if I'm a GM that wants that player, I'm still very comfortable playing the waiting game knowing that you have not had good offers. If I wanted that player now, I would have got him by now.
Yeah, but no, if you're that GM, Blake, you can think of it in terms of will the Canucks blink first, but you also should be considering will another team blink first and get the guy. Like it's not just a two-way street; it's a multi-avenue situation,
right?
Here.
But if I mean, based on what we know at the public level and what a GM may know at the private level, he might know. Like these guys that team's not desperate for him. That's why they're offering garbage because they're not desperate for him. That team, I know that so-and-so is only willing to go to this point.
Which is why I bring up Buffalo because I think they might be the most desperate and the most desperate for Elias Pettersson. And here's why. Elliott reporting the Canucks were willing to do Hedl, a first and a prospect. We think it was Adam Sikora, a second-round pick forward who's been okay in the HL We've heard that it was New York Rangers ownership that squashed that deal. And here's the thing. That's not an easy deal to recast if you're Chris Jury, the Rangers GM. Like, once your owner has said no to that, then the offer can only go one way, right? And you know the Canucks are not going to accept. So I think for the moment you have to think Miller to the Rangers is off the table unless James Dolan, the Rangers owner, has a change of heart. And he might. They've lost 2 in a row. And the other thing, Blake, they have the distinction of giving up the first points as Carolina Hurricanes, as Carolina Hurricanes plural, to Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall. They also gave up the first points as Colorado Avalanche to Martin H.S. and to Jack Drury. All 4 guys have scored against the New York Rangers in consecutive games, both losses for the Blue Shirts.
Just the most New York thank you baskets handed out since Derek Jeter.
But so I think the Miller market was limited to begin with, and I think it's softer if the Rangers are completely out. Dreger told us on Monday he didn't think the Stars were involved anymore. I'm not saying that that's going to equal an Elias Pettersson trade, but I think you're probably going to get more for Elias Pettersson between now and the deadline than you will on JT Miller between now and the deadline. Is that fair? Closer to their actual value.
Yeah, perhaps. Hey, Buffalo's got a lot of interesting pieces.
They sure do.
But they want to have their cake and eat it too. Like, I don't think they're up against it. So just a swap of star talent, I don't think is what they're trying to accumulate the star talent.
Oh, I think they're willing to swap. I think they're looking at their team and going, this ain't working.
No, of star talent. Like, the stars on that team are Tage Thompson, Rasmus Dahlin, and that's it.
Well, which brings you to the next level of player there.
Right.
Owen Power, and there's some scuttlebutt now that he might be available.
A lot of detractors of his game overall, though,
well,
too.
We believe the detractors include people in the Sabres camp who are looking at him and don't necessarily think that he's going to be that A-level defender.
Right.
Which is fine if you're getting a ton of offense out of him, but
which you don't.
Dylan Cousins, who's now in the midst of a second difficult season after getting paid, and then Bowen Byram. Cranbrook's Bowen Byram, as we know, is a RFA to be with Art Brights and is going to get paid and is looking for a role a little higher up the depth chart on defense where he can play a little bit more offensively, maybe run a power play. The other thing I'll just position to you here on Buffalo, which is interesting, because I don't think anybody would doubt that Buffalo has the pieces, because even beyond that level of player, Blake, Chilliwack's Zach Benson, at one point earlier this year, led the NHL in terms of puck retrievals on dump-ins. Like, that is absolutely Rick Tocchet style of hockey. They've got a couple of young centermen percolating, a Finn, Consta Helenius, and a Swede, Noah Ostlund, who are both signed prospects for them. Ostlund turns 21 next month. He was the 16th overall pick in 2022. He's playing down in Rochester with their AHL club. Helenius is really young. In fact, he played at the World Juniors. He was the 14th overall pick last year. A smaller centerman, but he's in Rochester as well. So, Buffalo has pieces even beyond the NHL level that you can maybe put them together and find a puzzle that fits in an Elias Pettersson trade.
I would
not to mention Levi, the goaltender, who's percolating still down on the farm.
If we're taking Dahlin and Thompson obviously out of the mix,
I think you are.
The only deal that I would do that I would feel comfortable as market value is Benson and Power for Pettersson. That's the only one to me, and there's no chance Buffalo's doing that. There's no chance. They're going to want to give you something lesser like a Cousins.
Would you do Cousins, Byram, and one of the, let's say, Oslin, the prospect center?
I mean, for Miller, for sure.
No, for Pettersson.
For Pettersson?
There's no Miller there.
Boy, I mean.
Yeah. Well, again, as Rutherford foreshadowed, or potentially foreshadowed, the trade in and of itself may have to include pieces that ultimately have to be repackaged with other pieces from the Vancouver Canucks to replace a top two center. Lastly here, before we tell you about our friends at Neighborhood and Yellow Dog, Gary Mason followed up yesterday on social media on the Rutherford interview. He said, obviously, a lot of interest in my interview. I mentioned that he said it was a possibility the two players could remain with the team for the rest of the season because of the space. I couldn't include the full quote, and he passed that along. And they've won two straight for the first time in nearly 2 months. And then Mason said, I asked him what happens if the team goes on a streak and starts winning regularly. And Rutherford said, quote, we evaluate things on a regular basis, so we'll see. When you win, everybody feels better. Does that make the players feel better? Does that make these two individuals feel better?
You could make the argument it postpones the urgency till the end of the season at the very least. But even if you got satisfied by a heater that you could salvage the season, why would you be so foolish as to believe you wouldn't end up into this place again, given what you saw from last season to this?
Given what you acknowledged, that it goes dormant and then, as his word, festers again. So, yes, I think that is mostly right.
Yellow Dog Brewing has released Starborn Kolsch as we talk about stars being born. Starborn Kolsch features 4 lucky furry friends on the can. From the Make My Pet a Yellow Dog Brewing Star contest, that's King Buddy, Gus, Yuka, and Winston. Adorable furry friends. This collaborative fundraising event with BCSPCA raised a total of $220,000. So everybody raised their Kolsch to Starborn and the beautiful pups supporting the BCSPCA.
Tell me Winston is an English bulldog that has a resemblance to the former prime minister.
I don't have breeds in front of me, but
Winnie.
Errors and omissions, we'll update you on the breeds tomorrow.
Game in Nashville tonight against the Predators, of course. First round opponent. Last year, some spicy games against Nashville of late. Dakota Joshua returning after missing 11 games. We don't yet know who he's in for. It was an optional morning skate. Is that still track?
Still tracking, yeah.
Dan Murphy is guessing that DPD, Elias Pettersson, is going to sit despite
faring very well.
Yeah, there was a bad penalty, but yeah, they've won both games. But it sounds like it's going to be Abbotsford's Noah Juleson for Elias Pettersson. And then the one I'm a little surprised on is Demko for Lankinen. I thought they would want to ride the hot goaltender, but here comes Thatcher again.
I think perhaps
does he just feel like he's going to play Demko in one of the next two and better this one against Nashville and its firepower as opposed to Dallas?
Yeah, I think they're trying to throttle the workload a little bit here and make sure that everybody's got some game left for the final push towards the Four Nations face-off. So, I mean, Demko's just got to start winning. We can
Does
point,
he ever?
We can point to the catastrophic injury and give him all sorts of leash, but there is a breaking point there. Especially,
I think we've reached it. Like at this point, like if you don't start seeing better results from Thatcher Demko, then I think you have to consider using him like a backup goaltender.
When you've got another goalie that is 10 games above 500 in and of himself, that's an option that the coach is going to want to use here eventually, almost exclusively.
You ain't got time to bleed
no.
if you're Rick Tocchet. And look, Calgary loses last night to Washington, so you've got to take it. Look, you beat a direct competitor in the postseason race in the West. St. Louis directly below you in the standings. still directly below you in the standings, but you've now put a 4-point cushion on St. Louis, having 2 games in hand. And if you win tonight, you're ahead of Calgary. Calgary has a game in hand, but nevertheless, for the moment, for the evening, if you win tonight, you get to leapfrog.
Not to mention
the Calgary Flames.
Based on the Avs' recent loss, you win your games in hand on Colorado, you catch them too. Now that involves 3 more wins in a row because Colorado's played a bunch of games, but you keep that possibility alive here that you could even catch them immediately.
Correct. So, the games are only getting more important here for the Vancouver Canucks, even with all this flying about. You wanted to touch on Brandon Saad for a second, because very unusual that a player would agree with a club to mutually terminate the contract when he had like $3+ million owed for next year. It tells me that Brandon Saad would rather play in the NHL than make bigger money riding the buses in the AHL. But it also tells me that Brandon Saad and his representatives probably know who's interested here and what they're looking at in terms of his next destination, including salary.
We've seen other examples of this year to year. There's usually at least one example of this on a year-to-year basis of a veteran on a mutually terminated contract that jumps aboard with somebody else mid-season as well. And it's $5.4 million he's walking away from over 2 years. And you have to think in his mind, no, in a different situation, I can perform. Maybe I make $1 million the rest of the way this year. Maybe I can make 2.5 next year if I show well, and I've almost recouped all my losses. And I'm playing in the NHL, as you say. I'm not in the American League.
Big boy who can skate, but
and this is not a full-throated, hey, the Canucks need this player. Not at all. It could be a complete bust. But he's got speed that the Canucks don't have a lot of. He's got some scoring pedigree. Even his stats from this season that got him mutually terminated are better than a lot of wingers on this team right now.
And he's a Pittsburgh guy.
And that stood out for me as well. Mm-hmm. So, again, this is not a panacea. This is not a savior. But in terms of a winger core that we...
he was playing 14 and a half minutes. I'm a little surprised. Like... it's third-line minutes. It's not like he was playing 9-10 minutes in a pure fourth-line role. Now, he was minus 14. I don't know what the underlines are. You'll have to tell me. And the shooting percentage was abysmal. He was shooting a little better than 9% this year.
It's his career low shooting
Last year
percentage.
he was shooting 18%, Blake. The year before, 15, 22 the year before. So is there a world where you chalk it up to is just some bad luck here? It's only 32.
Yeah, and again, you'd sign this guy for a rest of the year deal, a show me deal.
Do you think you don't think?
No, right now
you don't think he's got this year and next year set up with someone?
No.
Okay.
No. I think he believes in himself. I mean,
wow.
I think the Blues would have pulled the trigger on a deal if he had that sort of value somewhere.
Yep. Let's get to our menu, and it's presented by Greta 50 West Cordova, and come watch hockey with us. February 15th at Greta Bar. Canada takes on the USA. We're going to gather at 50 West Cordova, presented by Fountain Tire. We're going to host it. We got a raffle, exclusive prizes to be won, your chance to party it up, cheer on Team Canada. This is in support of the Social Run Club, YVR, and they're fantastic people. We thank them for their support and partnering here. Tickets are $10, or snag the VIP package, which includes $40, includes a burger, a beverage, and a game card for the awesome arcade. You get seating up to 6 people with the VIP packages. Doors at 4, puck drop at 5. This is a 19-plus event. Grab your tickets now, nationgear.ca. Greta Bar. Let the games begin. Laurence Gilman, a former assistant general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, and of course an executive in Toronto, Winnipeg, Arizona, beyond that, is going to join us, as will Frank Corrado. We will go over with Laurence. Okay, you've been in rooms. What possessed Rutherford to say what he said to Gary Mason? And we talked to Frank about some of the particulars in Buffalo that we just discussed Not to mention his take on what comments like that will do in a room based on his experience in the National Hockey League. That's all coming up here. Bet365 Bets of the Daytime, and this segment proudly presented by Bet365, Secure Some Price partner. I got my 2-goal win from Washington over Calgary.
I got a point from Kuzmenko, but I needed a goal from Kuzmenko, so it was close. But nah.
I'm going on Canucks in Nashville here. Of course, Monday in St. Louis was slump busting, right? That was the order of the day. Miller, Suter, Garland all digging out of those holes.
Yep.
Who's next? How about Jake DeBrusk? Goalless in 10. Is that just about the sweet spot? He's the streaky scorer, right? Is that just about the sweet spot in terms of, okay, you've had your ebb, now it's time to flow? DeBrusk plus 260 as an anytime goal scorer, and I just want to put this out there for you. Elias Pettersson, could you imagine? 1 goal all month, he's paying plus 230 as an anytime goal scorer.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. Just snakes mine.
So we go in cold with these?
Yeah. I can do 2.
Because we want that visceral reaction. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I appreciate your apology.
You can, in terms of the honors for tomorrow, you can have Pettersson at plus 30, okay? I will give you that.
I wonder if Pettersson interprets the Rutherford comments as really more being about JT Miller.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he takes a little bit of, like, he knows Miller ain't saying anything to him right now, right? Like there's no way Miller will cross any lines on Pettersson right now. They're all in good behavior. So I wonder if this frees up Pettersson just a little bit in his own mind.
It's not bad.
Gives him some confidence. Plus 230.
Yeah, that's a theory. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets, so whatever the moment, it's never ordinary. On Bet365, use code NATION when opening that account. And one last thing here. Our buddy Irf Gaffar, down to earth, he was in for you on Monday. The latest episode is with former Vancouver Canucks head coach Travis Green. And we got a clip to play you here. Here is Irf talking to Travis. Mental health has been taken on such new life, and this is something that, professional sports organizations deal with now on a day-to-day basis, not too dissimilar to your workplace. So here's Irf Gaffar asking Travis Green about, well, how they handle the mental health of their players, and you'll have Laurence Gilman coming up after that.
Players take leaves of absence for personal reasons. We've seen mental health obviously become a huge proponent in the NHL and what different teams are doing with hockey talks and that sort of thing. How much do you and your coaching staff take into consideration if a player's not having a good day, whether it's on the ice or off the ice and things like that? And how much do you talk to your guys when it comes to stuff like that?
Do we talk about mental health a lot daily? No.
Yeah.
But do we take it into consideration where a person is at? Yes. There's times where you might be upset with a player and how he's playing, but maybe you can tell that he already knows it, and you are only adding to the burden, to the stress, is something that you really have to pay attention, because ultimately we're trying to get our players to play the best that they can. And sometimes it's a heavier thumb, sometimes it's lighter, and that's a big art of coaching, I think.
Harrison Price from the historic Wall Center, and this segment brought to you by Ben Moss, proudly Canadian-owned, operated, a history dating back more than 100 years. They're committed to customer satisfaction. Check out the large selection. Canadian mine diamonds, lab-grown diamonds. They got diamonds with payment plans to suit your needs. 5 locations in BC: Abbotsford, Victoria, Chilliwack, Willowbrook, and Langley, Coquitlam Center. For more information, check out benmoss.com. Ben Moss, shine bright. So we welcome in the former assistant general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, NHL executive with the Canucks, Leafs, Coyotes, Jets, our pal Laurence Gilman. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you guys doing? Slow news day. Slow
exhausted.
news day.
Oh my goodness! Don't you miss this market? Don't you miss this market? Huh?
I do miss the market. I have to be honest with you.
Because, like, here's the thing. One of the ties that binds between you and I would argue Jim Rutherford is you knew how to communicate with this market. Like, Jim got into the good graces of Canucks fans early by being the straight talk express. This week's straight talk was maybe a little further down the line. You've been in these rooms, Laurence. You've been in these meetings with managers where you're trying to stick handle difficult situations, including things that you typically want to keep in-house. What did you make of what Rutherford had to say to Gary Mason this week?
Well, let me begin by saying for the 20th time, I'm not in the room. I'm not in the organization. I don't know the exact relationships that exist between anybody there, particularly JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. When I read Gary Mason's piece and saw the aftermath of it, the first thing that struck me was Jim Rutherford turned perception into reality. And it made me think about a similar situation that we had in our regime in 2012-13, where there was this perception that Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider couldn't stand each other and were both vying for the number 1 spot. It was creating friction with our team, and a lot of the same elements that are being put forth in the media and social media were out there. And our organization was proactive to dispel the perception and really hammer home the reality. And we did so by working with TSN and James Duthie to produce a piece called The Shocking Truth, which we had buy-in and sign off from our management, from our players, from our coaches. And it made light of the situation, and it highlighted that, in fact, Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider were, in fact, close and supported each other. Now, I don't believe this is the same situation at this point.
No,
I think
Wouldn't appear so.
I think that Jim Rutherford, as I've said many times, is he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame as a manager, not as a player, and it's because he's won 3 Stanley Cups and he's been around a long time and had a lot of success. I believe without reservation that his intentions and his actions were 100% deliberate on a few fronts. I do think that it was greasing the skids, so to speak, for the fact that there is going to be a deal in all likelihood at some point here. And it might not be one that the public looks at and says, that's a win, kind of similar to what the perception is of Colorado, in that trade that they made. Second, I think his choice of vehicle was fascinating, given that he did not go to one of the usual suspects, so to speak. He didn't go to Ian McIntyre. He didn't go to Ben Kuzma. He didn't go to Patrick Johnson. He chose to go to a long-standing, highly respected member of the media, and Gary Mason, who is affiliated with, and you'll appreciate this, Matt, one of the most highly regarded publications in North America. I believe that. And
now it is. Before, not so much. It employed all sorts of ne'er-do-wells.
What we always we've always said about Jim is he's been in markets, but he's kind of been a national figure. He's always understood that, and he's a Toronto guy too, as well. So I would not be surprised if he and his family were globe readers at one point. Go ahead, Laurence.
Isn't everybody?
But I don't work there anymore, Gilman. All right,
Well, you took offense when I said made the comment that there were 2 newspapers.
Oh, that's right.
That's right.
I
know that it's a touchy subject with you. Anyway, getting back to the point at hand, I think it was deliberate, going to a national publication and someone who's not in that locker room every day or following the team around. And I think it, was calculated, and I think it was highly impactful, actually. I also believe that it was a deliberate attempt to call out these players and make the statement that whatever is going on here, the onus is on you. It's not on your teammates. It's not on the coaches. It's not on management. It's not on ownership. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the fallout is. I will be fascinated to see the next interviews that are conducted with both JT Miller and Elias Pettersson to see what they have to say about this.
So there is a theory out there, and would like to know your take on this, that this was the last-ditch effort to almost shame the players into figuring this out. Because ultimately, Gary did well to put out an addendum on social media later to say, just to be clear, there was a scenario that he did carve out, Jim Rutherford, where nobody was traded because they started to play better. Ran out of space in the piece, but he wanted to make the record clear there that he did carve out the slim possibility for that as well. Do you think that was part of his calculation that you talked about, or do you think it is all prepping for a trade?
No, I agree with you, Blake. I think that part of this was putting the onus on the players, for sure, and letting them answer for whatever problems that are being, dealt with by the coaching staff, by management, by the organization. And I think it's a test to see what their mettle is. I mean, I think Jim Rutherford probably had multiple objectives and intentions when he conducted this interview. So it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is, for sure. And the interesting thing is he did it after the team won back-to-back games for the first time in over a month. They played a pretty good game, pretty good road game in St. Louis. And then to come back with this, it was like, wow, I was surprised. It was really good theater.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. If you're sitting in another GM's chair, somebody who has had discussions on either JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, and you read that from Rutherford, do you get do you get a jolt of urgency shot through you? Like, oh man, Jimmy real mad. Maybe I've got to improve my offer right now because it sounds like he's fixing to do something quick.
Or does he look more desperate?
I don't. Again, they were talking about a very, very, very veteran general manager who, doesn't rattle easily. I think one of the perhaps unintended consequences, and maybe not an unintended consequence, is that I guarantee you Jim Rutherford's phone rang off the hook yesterday from the other general managers, if for no other reason than to ask him, like, what's the deal here? Like, what is really going on? And what are you looking to do if they didn't already know? But I don't think it changes. Listen, these guys are all shrewd. We've talked about this before. They know what fair market value is for this player. You just saw a player move, a marquee player move. Now, granted, this player is going to be an unrestricted free agent in Rantanen, and you're talking about JT Miller, who's, on an 8-year, significant contract. That's different, but you can see what the framing of the market value is for a top 6 player or a top 2, center iceman.
Are you surprised?
Whether it's him or whether it's Elias Pettersson?
It's clear the offers are not great for either of these players. Better probably for Pettersson, but most certainly for Pettersson. But I don't think that the Canucks have been blown away by anything they have seen. Otherwise, I think they probably would have pulled the trigger on one of those deals. Are you surprised that the value? And we all know the pressures on them. They've had down years. They've got long contracts, expensive ones. But I'm still mildly surprised that the offers have diminished to the point where they're not interested at all right now.
Well, you don't know that, Blake. I've heard that at the end of the day, it was the Rangers that killed the deal for Miller. I have heard that, the Canucks were framing a deal with Carolina for Pettersson, and we're pretty far down the road, and Carolina pivoted and went to Colorado, and that's how that deal fell apart. That doesn't mean, if either of those instances are true, and I don't know that they are, but if they are, that doesn't mean that hasn't been interest in either player for deals that would have benefited the Canucks team. You just don't know. But it's certainly, if there was ever any doubt, and I don't think there was ever any doubt that the Canucks are open for business, I'm pretty sure that interview and that article, sealed it.
The report was Hedel, a first, and prospect Adam Sikora for Miller. Don't know whether there's any protections on that first-round pick. I don't know how much you know of Adam Sikora, but something like that. Does that make sense to you on Miller, Laurence? Is that something that you would consider?
I think it's yeah. I think it's in a ballpark. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha.
You guys, I think it was Blake last week when we talked, put forth a deal of potential deal with Carolina for Chatfield, and I can't remember who the other player was. And I said at the time,
Netchess. Was it Netchess? Yeah.
Well, Netchess, Drury, a second and a fourth for Pettersson. Is that in the ballpark?
Yeah, could be. I wouldn't say no. Let's put it that way. Again, it's easy to speculate on these things, and I know this from my own experience. If you're not on the phone, if you're not the one that's actually on the phone talking to your counterparts, whether it's other general managers, and sometimes deals get framed by assistant general managers, you have no idea. It's rank speculation, really.
Yeah, sure.
We are talking about valuable players who are, number one and number two center icemen. Every team are looking. 99% of the teams in the NHL are looking for those commodities.
Right. So one of the scenarios that Rutherford laid out with Mason is that we may have to make a move here where we don't get back a number one center iceman or even a number two center iceman, and we may have to get some pieces and then go out and try and find that replacement number one or number two centerman. How difficult is that to do?
It's on the more difficult side of the ledger. Let's put it that way. When I saw those comments, it made me think that they're prepping the market for something that, so that it's not a complete storm when they make a deal that brings back, IFCOM, as we call it, or futures, or, young players. But make no mistake, it is not easy to acquire a number one or number two center iceman, and it takes a savvy general manager, which Jim Rutherford clearly is, as the president of hockey operations. And I'm not, discounting Patrick Alvin in this discussion either. But it's a tall order if you're going to be cobbling together, first round picks and draft picks and prospects to try and get yourself a number one or two center iceman that's going to help the hockey team today.
Yeah, and he even talked about other positions, and that had us wondering a little bit about if you moved one of these center icemen for a frontline defenseman, and then basically said, "Man, with Hughes, Hronek, this frontline defenseman, and Thatcher Demko and/or Kevin Lankinen going forward, maybe that's a better fit for Rick Tocchet hockey." I mean, Blake will hate it. It'll be a lot of 2-1 games. But, does that make sense to you at all?
Well, it makes
Laurence?
I have always ascribed to the theory that if you're trading center icemen, you're trading them for defensemen, or other center icemen or defensemen. You don't typically trade centers for wingers. You tend to lose those kind of deals. And I have consistently stated on this podcast with you guys that I believe their defense is definitely in need of an upgrade in the top four, or better yet, top two pairing, and to receive back that piece in a deal for either one of these players, and I'm only speaking of one component of the deal.
Right.
That makes some sense for sure.
So, given what we know now, this interview's happened. There's even more uncertainty, perhaps, cast into the room. How do you suspect they will respond? First of all, do you think Rutherford would go down and follow up that interview with a chat in the room or a chat with those two guys? And then secondly, just what does that room do with all of this information and another sort of bomb drop, if you will? Although, speaking of which, I've heard from a source that one player in the room has already said this room needs to get nuked. What do you think they do with all of this swirling around?
Well, I bet you the first thing that happened was Jim Rutherford got phone calls from the agents representing the two players to ask him to clarify his situation, or the situation for his client.
Mm-hmm.
if it needed to be done. I don't think that. Listen, I know how I would handle it, or
Okay.
the regimes that I would have. I believe in dialogue, open dialogue, all the time. Things get resolved with communication. They do not get resolved by silence or ignoring the problem. I would think that there would be, discussion that would occur both, with the players individually at this point, I believe, and with the coach. And, it may very well have been, that a meeting occurred with each player, with Jim Rutherford, Patrick Alvin, and Rick Tocchet, just to discuss the situation and, move forward. But I don't think that, lots of times nothing is the best thing to do. I'm not certain that that's the right path in this instance.
Yeah. Can they win games immediately in the wake of this, do you think? Like 200?
Yeah.
No, I don't mean the rest of the season, Matt. I mean immediately here. Like, is there a chance that they need to lick their wounds here for a couple of games?
Yeah, I think what could happen is both guys get pissed off.
There you go.
And they're embarrassed. And, they want to, shove it up, somebody's, backside.
Right.
Really. And that could very easily be the case. And who knows? This could be something that galvanizes the group and brings focus to the players. Who knows? I mean, it's going to be fascinating theater, as I said, to see it play out. But I don't see any reason why this can't be something that the group harnesses and brings them together.
Could have been one of Jim's motivations for this, right? See if we can get a final spark out of them here. Great stuff, Laurence. Very insightful as always. We appreciate the time, good sir, and we'll catch up next week.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
If you are struggling with things like managing stress, anxiety, relationships, or divorce, reach out to the counselors at Advanced Counseling. Book your free initial consultation today at advancedcounseling.ca.
So Garrison Price from the historic Wall Center.
And you don't know joy until you know the joy of driving past a gas station. It is truly amazing when you know that you don't need to ever do it again. And that will be you once you get behind the wheel of a Toyota BZ4X.
Plugged it in overnight at home, right?
Ready to go at the outset of every morning. Never, ever stopping at a gas station. You can have this joy as well because you can get it up to $12,500 in rebates right now in the BZ4X. And you can finance one from 0.19% APR for 36 months. Those interest rates are coming down, aren't they? Visit shoptoyota.ca or visit your local Pacific Toyota dealer today. Just take one for a test drive and see what happens.
Let's welcome in former Vancouver Canuck TSN hockey analyst, Mr. Frank Corrado. How are you?
I'm good. What's going on, fellas? Anything to report out in Vancouver?
Quite weak.
Stuff happening?
Yeah. What did you make of Rutherford?
I mean, I think the timing is interesting, especially considering like your team just played a really good game, arguably one of their best games of the season, and they're still right in the middle of this playoff hunt. But I don't know, it feels like something like that could have happened when the team was on the tailspin, and maybe they are still in the tailspin. I don't know, but it was weird timing coming off that St. Louis game. Regardless, I don't think one game here or there is going to change how anyone feels about the situation. And boy, was it ever revealing. If anyone had any kind of questions about, well, is it media driven? Are we making too big of a deal of it? I think those, notions are all squashed with the way that Jimmy Rutherford kind of laid it on the line. There was one thing that stuck out to me about the entire thing. The fact that Quinn Hughes' name got brought up kind of out of nowhere, wasn't it? All of a sudden, if we're going to move on, and then maybe Quinn Hughes has to move on as well. Whoa. What are we talking about here? Is everything on the table? And how long does it take to strip it down and build it back up? I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, but it was very revealing for sure.
It's what makes the trade for lesser options, which I think people are coming to terms with. Many people think Rutherford spoke to prep people for an underwhelming return. I mean, prepping the fans is one thing. You've got to prep Quinn Hughes for the underwhelming return, right? I mean, what's he going to, even if it's a decent player, we'll go back to the Rangers rumored deal, like a heel. Like, Heel's a decent player, but is not going to provide what JT Miller provides. You know, what does Quinn Hughes think of that kind of a trade? And, you know, how does he forecast his last 2 years in this deal?
Well, I think he would look at it and say, how did we get here? Like, if you're in the market, like if you live in Vancouver, you're a fan of that team, you guys, the media, you know how we got to this point, right? Like, you could go and trace the steps. Like, Miller comes in, Horvat goes out. You double down, like you prioritize Miller. And then the crazy thing is, you know, you knew, you're acknowledging that you knew that this was an issue the whole time, but you signed Miller, then you signed Pettersson, and you kind of just thought, hey, like we're gonna play hockey, it's gonna be okay, this is gonna get squashed between the two guys, and you know, we're hopefully not gonna have to worry about it. Hindsight's 2020. Like, no one, I don't know if you were gonna prep for the worst. But it's not like this just popped up out of nowhere. So you kind of made the long-term plans. And so now if I'm Quinn Hughes, like, how do you bring that back to Quinn Hughes? Just saw how you guys handled the long-term plans. How are you going to do the next, you know, bunch of long-term plans? Are you going to make similar mistakes? I know it's a very unique case, but you know what I mean? Like, do you have the trust after that, like, okay, these guys, they know what they're doing because they've seen it.
It shakes confidence. How would the rooms that you've been in, you think, react to something like this?
It's really weird. I kind of think there's always going to be a little bit of a divide, right? Like, no one ever gets, regardless of whether you're in the room every single day, like, there's always that, like, what he said, what she said, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I feel like there are going to be players that probably lean to the Miller camp, and then there's probably players that lean to the Pettersson camp. So I can think of a million ways that it doesn't go well for the Canucks, because if you move on from Miller and you keep Pettersson, well, the guys that were in the Miller camp, like, how do they feel about this whole situation? Do they think that, like, oh, you sent the wrong guy out of town, we think this guy's not the right guy to lead us, and, like, do they get over that, right? And it gets so soap opera-y now at this point, and then vice versa, right? So, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like the fracture. And it's hard to know because you're not in the room, but having experienced dressing rooms, like, it's not just, you know, two guys living the fracture. I think there's guys that kind of say, okay, well, I think this guy's the idiot. Well, I think that guy's the idiot. And then, you know, you have a little bit of a divide as well. I don't know. Like, I'm saying, I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just trying to think, like, pretty sure that's how guys would think about it in the room.
By all accounts, this fracture was exacerbated in the wake of Bo Horvat's trade. And yes, they had a great season last year. So my question to you is, what happens if this team chose to trade Miller at that point and not Bo Horvat? Do you think they are as good a team last year? Are they a better team now? Where do you think they're at?
They're not as good as they were last year. Like, JT Miller had an unbelievable season last year. You can't, regardless of all this stuff, you can't argue it, you can't deny it. Like, truly one of the best two-way center in the NHL, and had the season to show for it. So I don't think last year happens without JT Miller, but probably it's a little easier for Pettersson to be himself. And
how much better is Pettersson? Yeah, we don't know the answer to that.
Right? Like, he probably doesn't live in the cloud of, you know, whatever bothers him about JT Miller every single day. So maybe he's a better player because of it. Like, these are the things we don't know. But it would be probably a little more of a cohesive group with Horvat and not JT Miller. And, like, by all accounts, Horvat was the one that kind of bridge the gap and smooth things over between those guys to begin with. And, like, I stand by what I said at the time that happened. Horvat was your captain. Like, he was very deserving to be there in that position. Never did anything that, you know, would kind of signal that he didn't want to be that guy. So I you know, at the time, didn't love it. It was proven, I guess, wrong to me because JT Miller and the team was so good last year. But here we are. And it's like, you know, the same issues have kind of, you know, crept up and they haven't gone away. And it's funny what, you know, Jim Rutherford said, like, you know, it goes away for a bit and then it comes back. Well, yeah, it comes back when you lose, You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
everyone's winning and things are going great, like that's not the true test. The true test is how do you get through the trying times? And whatever's gone on here, these guys have not been able to get through the trying times.
This isn't a rumor, but just walk me through this. Miller for Horvat, who says no right now?
I don't know if anyone says no right now.
You think both sides would be willing to hey, we should mediate this one?
I don't realistically, like if the Islanders, they want to stay relevant, right? They're getting older though. If
fewer years left on the Miller deal, by the way.
Yeah,
and it's a lower cap hit by just a smidge.
It would be really weird if that happened.
It'd be really weird. Yes.
It would be really weird. Yeah. Like I think ultimately when I'm sure you guys are doing this now, you go down the rabbit hole of like, okay, who would be a viable suitor for Miller? Who would be a viable suitor for Pettersson? I think there's more fits for Pettersson than there is for Miller. Like I think the teams that would be looking at Miller are the teams that need something to put them over the top right now. Like long term. Like I was doing Ottawa radio this morning and they were asking me about Pettersson and maybe, making a package out there around maybe Josh Norris or something like that. And I think there's some markets that look at this and say, this could be the next Jack Eichel trade. And maybe it could be. I mean, there's no guarantee. I think there's still room for skepticism. Like in all this, I know it hasn't been easy for Pettersson. You can't undeniably say that he has held up his end of the bargain as far as the type of player he should be. So there is room for skepticism regardless of who moves on.
It's funny you mention teams out there circling all of this, but the Buffalo Sabres have been reported to be interested in Elias Pettersson and talking to the Vancouver Canucks. I would like to run down a few of the principles there and get your evaluations on them, because one of the names that's jumped out is Owen Power, the former first overall. And look, there's a school of thought that you need X number of games from a defenseman before you can get a true evaluation of him. Has he played enough? But you tell me, what kind of player is Owen Power? Do you see him fulfilling that first overall pedigree either now or going forward?
See, it's hard with the first overall pedigree for defensemen, right? Like, look back at the history, whether it's been Eric Johnson, Aaron Ekblad. Like, when you think of a defenseman getting picked first overall, Rasmus Dahlin, you're like, this guy should be winning Norris trophies. And maybe that's just not going to be the case. Maybe he's just going to be a really good defenseman. And I think in the case of Owen Power, that's fine. Like, he probably will not be, if you look at the guys that are doing it, whether it's Makar or Hughes, or if Werenski jumps into that mix, like, maybe Owen Power's not going to be that guy. Time will tell. Aaron Ekblad's not that guy, but he's really damn good. And he won a Stanley Cup last year for the Panthers, shutting down Connor McDavid. So I think, the expectations are one thing. The reality is a different thing. But for Owen Power, like, he probably came into the league, and this is how it goes down for everyone in Buffalo, having to do too much, having to play too much, having to handle too much by necessity, because that's the way that team has been built. And so, like, if you put him in a good situation, Owen Power is a really good defenseman, moves the puck well. Like, at his best, he has a lot of confidence. He's big enough to handle the rigors of things and the physicality. It's just about maturity and growing and all that kind of stuff, the natural progression of a defenseman. But like, Owen Power was picked first overall for a reason, and has been, given a lot of responsibility at an early age.
Yeah, and sometimes they're just the product of a weak draft, like Chris Phillips, the first overall pick in 1996. All he did was play 1,200 games and be a stalwart defensively. It just turned out it wasn't a very strong draft that year. Do me Dylan Cousins. What's up with Cousins since he had the breakout 2 years ago?
I mean, yeah, you're right. 2 years ago has the big year. It's an interesting one because I called two games against the Sabres this season. I called one where he was really going through it. Like, he would have had 9 points and like 2 goals. And I don't necessarily know if he had scored on a goalie yet. Like, it was kind of right in the thick of things. And it's just like a player that was very unsure of himself, not necessarily as assertive as he could be. And then, like, it started to pick up for him, puck started going in. He does have a good shot. Like I've seen him score from distance, beat goaltenders clean, tops of the circles, that kind of stuff. So
Did so versus the Canucks, yeah.
Yeah, like there's something there for sure. You always have to watch these guys in Buffalo through like the Buffalo glasses. And it's sad to say that, but when you see all the players that have moved on from there and had success elsewhere, it's like you almost have to watch it with a filter on and be like, okay, that's that version of the player. What am I going to get? Like if you got Bowen Byram, who plays all kinds of minutes for them, like he skates up and down the ice and he's on the ice all the time. Like what is the Bowen Byram version you're going to get? Or, you could get the guy and he's unbelievable. Or you could go the other way and be like Colorado and get Casey Middlestat and he's buried on your fourth line right now. And, you don't really have a use for him in your top six per se. So it's a little tricky, I think, sometimes with a team that is struggling and lower in the standings and has the kind of, unfortunate track record that the Sabres have with players moving on and having success elsewhere. But Dylan Cousins has shown it already. And at times this season has shown the confidence that, gave him that breakout season 2 years ago.
I'm going to turn you back to Blake, but just Cousins and Byram for Pettersson. Would you do that if you're Vancouver?
I would be considering it, I think. Like, how do you not consider that? You're getting like a minute muncher. The thing with Byram is there's always going to be the red flags with, the concussion history. But let's be honest. A team that's acquiring Pettersson, you don't think they're looking at it saying there's red flags with this guy?
Yeah.
Like the red flags are going both ways. Like you're getting a good centerman, you're getting a really good defenseman, and you know what? Like you're moving on from a guy that could be 100-point player that at times was beloved in this market. Like there's an attachment thing there as well, but
you're getting proof of concept. He's got 100 points. He's got the Selke votes. Like all that has happened. You can't stuff it back in. Can
it happen again though, Blake? Can it happen again?
Given his age, I think it's a reasonable expectation. With guys like Cousins and Byram, you're still banking on potential. Like neither one of those guys has arrived as a star in the league, and Pettersson has.
I think you're kind of banking on potential with Pettersson too. Like if you're acquiring him now, you're acquiring the guy that's on pace for less than 60 points this year. Like I know it's recency bias, but it's recency. Like this is what he's doing right now. And you know what? Maybe he'll turn it around if he's gone or Miller's gone and he's going to be back, right? Like we know he's done it. But I still think like if you're the acquiring team, you're like, I'm kind of hoping there's the potential here that this guy is not what he's shown this year, and he's more like what he's shown in the past. Like realistically, the red flags go both ways.
Different sizes of red flags, but I hear you.
Yes, that's a good point.
So what I'm hearing from Blake Price in the role of Patrick Alvin is that if you sweeten a little bit, you're in the role of Kevin Adams, then we've got a deal here.
I do like the concept, but I do like the concept of Vancouver getting a defenseman out of all this. Like they need a defenseman. And I think if you can bring in a guy in a trade, maybe there's some cost certainty and you don't have to overpay someone in the offseason. I don't know.
There's a whole.
I like the concept of getting a defenseman, Frank, but it's probably going to be at the expense of a top two center, unless Cousins and Byram and they both work out for Vancouver, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why you would have to consider that if you're Patrick Alvin.
Also, don't you think there's a million ways that Vancouver loses in this situation? Like Jimmy Rutherford said, there's no good solution. So
no, right?
For sure.
I can think of a million ways that Vancouver gets slaughtered with this whole thing. I have a hard time seeing the wins. So if you can grasp something that you can look at and say, okay, it's a marginal victory. I don't know. It's not. It's a very imperfect situation.
It's and this is where the criticism of Rutherford even coming forward and speaking can arise, and that I think it pours gas on the fire, and we saw it with JT Miller's comments today after the skate too, where he just refuses to comment. It's thrust into his face, and I I don't believe that I'm of the mind that this has helped the situation at all, Jim Rutherford opening his mouth. And it was already a skeptical situation for the Canucks to reap the rewards for these two players. It feels like it's even more so right now.
I wonder how calculated it actually was, or if it was just I'm off the cuff, because he has a tendency to just let it fly. But I also wonder
open to
too,
interpretation.
if it's like,
yeah,
everyone knows you're in a position of weakness, right? Like everyone would admit you're in a position of weakness. Everyone knows you got to make a move. But if you double down on that, do two negatives turn into a positive? Like, did you go out there now and spill all this tea and throw gasoline on the fire? And it's like I almost doubled down to being in a point of weakness that people might look at it and say, is he close to something? Do I have to up something here? Like, is there a little bit of a, I'm not going to call it a sweepstakes, but I just think it gets you thinking a little bit if you're on the other end of things.
Yep. We wondered, is he trying to increase the urgency, fear of missing out with some guys around the league? Okay, buddy. Great stuff. Thank you for this. We'll catch up next week.
Okay, boys. Have a good one.
If you are struggling with things like managing stress, anxiety, relationships, or divorce, reach out to the counselors at Advanced Counseling. Book your free initial consultation today at advancedcounseling.ca.
Harrison Price from the historic Wall Center, where if you have your tickets to the big game, why not make it a full experience? Stay downtown at the Wall. Call 604-331-1000. Ask for the Harrison Price rates. Some blackout dates apply based on availability. You can text this show 778-402-9680. Email live at harrisonprice.com. All of it to the Great Clips inbox. Great Clips!
It's going to be great.
This is not so great. I read this and a shiver went down my spine, because if there is hope for the Whitecaps this year, it is building on the two Scotsmen. Ryan Gauld, of course, the team MVP, and then Stuart Armstrong, who is a pedigreed player who came in late last year, wasn't in the best game shape, but I think there were high hopes that he and Gauld, and we saw snippets of this, operating in the midfield, would be quite central to the Caps' attack. A journalist in England, Martin Sanders, is reporting it seems Stuart Armstrong might be heading back to England to play in the championship. He's been heavily linked with a potential move to West Bromwich Albion in the last few days. 32-year-old midfielder reportedly eager to return to the UK, and he notes he's a good player with plenty to offer at age 32. Now, Glass City has poo-pooed this, and Glass City is usually pretty good on Caps player moves. But
I don't think anybody was disappointed. I think Vanny was a big fan of Stuart Armstrong from last season. I don't think there was, despite the fact that, remember Vanny kept him out for weeks on end there in the middle part of September. Vanny saw how good he was, but wanted him to be at his best. So I think right to the last day for Vanny, he thought that was a very good player that could help the Vancouver Whitecaps.
For sure. I mean, we saw it.
Yeah.
If that is him not in great shape, wow.
Right.
Like there's
right.
a lot.
So
there. Could this be that Armstrong has seen what Jesper Sorensen is about and maybe doesn't necessarily love what's coming here?
The rumors started before Jesper Sorensen's appointment, so they go back weeks. But I don't know. He came here eyes wide open. Like, I don't think anything that he's seen is necessarily going to lead him astray. It would be a sale at this point because he's leaving so early. You'd think the Whitecaps would be asking for, on the relative scale, sun, moon, and stars. So if it happened, I don't think the Whitecaps come away empty-handed with it all. And they would have to, there's some crazy things happening in MLS right now. Like Evander could be sold to Cincinnati from Portland. Evander, like maybe the best player in the league offensively at the very least. It could be a wild 5 weeks here before, or not even 4 weeks before the MLS season gets underway. Which leads us to the other Whitecaps point we've got. The schedule just got a lot more easy to digest for both player and fan alike. They're reducing the number of in-season competitions for every team to partake in. You will only take part in two of, maximum. And it doesn't even guarantee that you're playing. TFC is only playing in one, the Canadian Championship. You'll play in either the U.S. Open or the Canadian Championship, the domestic cups on either side of the border. And then maybe you'll be playing in Leagues Cup or Champions Cup. In the Whitecaps case, no Leagues Cup, just the Champions Cup, which I think, selfishly speaking, is the better.
Better.
Yes.
Three-time Canadian champion, and that Leagues Cup was just dreadful last year.
So that will be playoff teams that aren't otherwise in the Champions Cup.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot better.
Yeah.
And I particularly like that if we can get those championship games moved up into the Leagues Cup window, because you remember how late the Canadian Championship was last year. And
exhausted a Whitecaps team.
Well, an exhausted Whitecaps team, but also one that, because it happened midweek during the school year, did not bring out the crowd that we had seen the previous years for the Canadian title. All right, poll question results from, first, got to tell you, the Rugby Sevens are back at BC Place. 10-year anniversary for the HSBC Rugby Sevens, going February 21st to 23rd. It is truly one of the great parties on the Vancouver calendar. So grab yourself, your friends, put on the fancy dress. 12 women's, 15 men's teams, including both Canadian squads, 3 full days of action. Single-day tickets are on sale. Friday tickets starting from $45 plus fees. And for the fan that wants to cram all the fun into one day of partying, you can enjoy a next-level rugby experience with VIP tickets from just $130 a day. And that gives you player access, a private bar and lounge, in-seat food and beverage service. Tickets on sale now. Go to Van Sevens. You spell out sevens, vansevens.com. Now, poll question results. Surrey Mitsubishi poll question results from Tuesday. 2,000 votes on this one, partner, is a big one. Now that their feud is undeniable, where do you stand? Team Miller, Team Petey, neither, trade both. The winner was?
I'm not going in confidently here. Team Pettersson?
Neither, trade both. It got 48%. Team Pettersson got 34%. Team Miller got 19%. Louis, Team Canucks should have been an option. All these options suck. Yeah, I hear you, Louis. Ambassador Paul from down in New Zealand. Team P, really, folks? The elite player on 11.6? Don't they lift those around them, make others better, not needing 20-plus different wingers to see which one will lift him up? Either he shapes up or goes. End of. Wes Miller produces more, better on draws, more physical, proven playoff performer, lower AAV. I don't care who is older or younger. I'd rather an older guy who contributes more than a middle-aged player who doesn't contribute as much and who costs more. Different perspective. Haven't heard a lot of that. And then Goro. Team PD all the way. If they trade PD, I'm done with this regime and the team and hope. And the team. And Hope Hughes joins his brothers in New Jersey. Yeah, that's another calculation here, right? You know, which one is more likely to keep Hughes in-house? Errors and omissions. I have one from last week. It might have even been the previous week, but it was pointed out to me, and it is correct. We were talking about how few home wins the Vancouver Canucks have, and mentioned that they were tied at the time with Utah and Buffalo. And I said Buffalo and Utah have also played fewer home games, and so they could usurp the Canucks. And while that is true, of course, those home games would have had to have been immediately for them to win them and usurp the Canucks. And since then, the Canucks have gotten a 9th home victory on home ice, whereas Utah is still at 8. So, yes, the timing of the home games would have mattered on that statement. Anything you're seeing?
No. All good.
Another perfect show for Blake. Comes right back from the ski vacation and just letter perfect. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate you spending some time and connecting with us. Please do subscribe to all our assorted channels, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow on social, X, Insta, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky. We're live on many of those platforms. noon Pacific time weekdays. And, of course, support the community sponsors you hear us talking about. Keep it local.